So this episode will be about Thomas Edison and what I call ruthless creativity or ruthless innovation. Thomas Edison is a very interesting phenomenon, and what I'm trying in these episodes is to get people ideas, concepts from different places, from different fields, in a way that will help us have a deep appreciation for how great work tends to happen, how creativity works, how innovation catches on in society. So Thomas Edison, often called the Wizard of Menlo Park, was a prolific inventor. Okay, there are more than 1,000 patents to his name in the US alone. More than 1,000 patents. He was part of iconic achievements. One of them included the wide commercialization of light bulbs. And this is a misconception. The light bulb wasn't invented by Edison. It was perfected or commercially perfected by Edison. He created the phonograph. He did an experiment that led to the creation of the phonograph, and he pioneered the motion picture technology. And these words are important in terms of the difference between them: invented versus perfected versus pioneered. So Edison's work fundamentally shapes our modern life, and his work extended beyond the creation of these individual products. Edison, as we will see, was a man of systems. He created an industrial research lab, the first industrial research lab in Menlo Park. We will look at that. And he sort of designed or delivered one of the first electric power grid. And we will see what that means. Edison's legacy is a bit controversial. So in the war of currents, there are very interesting / evil deeds that Edison needed to do to get his ideas to be implemented on a wide scale. And again, this is something we will look at. So what is special about Thomas Edison? How can you have 1,000 patents in your name in so many different and diverse fields? How can you create a company that is so big with a lasting legacy and covers so many market segments and widely successful based on innovation and creativity and invention? These are some of the questions we will try to think about in the coming 20 minutes or so. The discussion will take us through Edison's views to thinking about education, invention, work, collaboration, systems, management, creativity. We will also think about ethics and the time dependence of ethics and how we can look at and judge the ethical considerations of others, particularly those who lived in a different time. And at one point, we will use a very interesting comparison with Tesla, because the two are frequently compared. We will use a comparison with Tesla to highlight interesting psychological work and management related differences that are a testimony to the radically different and mysterious ways in which creativity can work. So as we frequently do, let's look at the knowledge dimensions, the learning, academic dimensions that are present in the Thomas Edison story. Interestingly, Thomas Edison had almost no formal education whatsoever. Almost no formal education whatsoever. Very brief and unremarkable presence at school, a few months, and then he was just sent back home, or decided to stay home, where his mother homeschooled him, Nancy Edison. And this kind of homeschooling by his mom fostered a certain love for self-directed learning and practical learning, in a sense. Edison says, "I was never made for the classroom. I could not sit still." And this evokes a certain image of this classroom as a place where kids are supposed to sit still and listen, take in, and not everybody can do that. And this is kind of a problem in formal education. And so what happened is that Edison tended to have a pretty negative view of education, academia in general. He used to call university graduates theorists and used to look down upon on them and to think that they are kind of impractical. Because for Edison, the value of an idea lies in the using of it. Ideas are supposed to be practical, and this is something we will see throughout his work. So Edison was homeschooled. He read a lot. He had interest in different fields, including mechanics, physics, chemistry, and so on. But, and this is very interesting. In early stages of his work, he had this very negative view of academia. He used to hire people regardless of any academic qualification whatsoever, just thinking about self-taught as he was, and the spirit of invention or perseverance that they have. But with time, and as the inventions and the work grew more complex, he kind of understood that there have to be some partnerships with academia. So he worked with universities, he started working with scientists more. He had agreements on both research, commercialization, and development of new technologies with academic institutions. And this kind of reflects a very interesting shift in perspective. So he maintained an overall strong opinion that academia tends to waste. It is not practical enough. But his views on the possibility of cooperation, his views on the necessity for theory and the importance of theory kind of changed with time. And this is interesting. It is because as he matured and as he saw the increasing complexity, this increasing complexity must come with certain adeptness or expertise or deeper knowledge that comes with research. His view of knowledge focused on and revolved around these practical dimensions, the utility of the idea. What can we do with this? Let's not waste a lot of time with theory, but it is very interesting how his perspective evolved to appreciate sometimes the importance of academic rigor and scientific research. The second dimension of knowledge is a flip side. It's not about his own knowledge, but about how he wanted to and made sure that the world knew about his inventions. And so here we will talk about a little bit about the marketing and PR dimensions of Edison, which are very interesting because Edison was essentially an innovator, a person who brought ideas and inventions to the market. And one of his most creative acts was not just inventing a certain product or perfecting technically a certain product, it was his mastery of the marketing and PR tools available to him at the time. So I would argue that Edison was a master in understanding the power of images. There is something called the current wars. And so the story of the current wars is that Thomas Edison and his company were trying to promote DC current, direct current, as the model for electricity, as it became obvious that soon electricity will be adopted as a utility in cities. And Edison was pushing direct current, while Westinghouse and Tesla were working on other things, mainly the alternating current, AC. And so, in order to push his own agenda, and this is what came to be known as the current wars, Edison staged a number of demonstrations to show the public how unsafe alternating current, AC current was. And what were these demonstrations? Well, Edison started electrocuting animals. So, so in public, he would get an animal, a chicken, cat, dog, and at one time, Topsy the elephant, and he just electrocuted them with AC current to show how unsafe AC current was, quote unquote. It is not that unsafe compared to DC, right? There are certain technicalities that dictate how safe or unsafe one of them is, depending on the voltage and on many variables. So the idea here was the image. When the public sees this elephant being electrocuted, they will say, "Oh, if the elephant is being electrocuted, what can happen to me?" And and so he was successful. Edison helped supported the development of the electric chair as a method for execution, partly for the same reason. Okay, it's about imagery, putting in the public's mind that alternating current AC is deadly and you shouldn't. There are more examples of imagery that Edison used in order to promote the light bulb. Once he decorated, I think it was around Christmas, and this was one of the first demonstrations of decorating a house, decorating a place with lights, with electric light bulbs. And he lighted them, and people saw this, and it was obviously amazing and surprising. And this sort of was a memorable image. Another memorable image that Edison created, another is J.P. Morgan's house. J.P. Morgan was his financier and backer, and J.P. Morgan's house was, I think, the first house to be to have electricity. He had his own DC generator, and it would light up the house. So that's one. Mastery of imagery, relationship with journalists. Edison had, and we know how principled journalists are. So Edison had great relationship with journalists. He would give them content, access to the lab, material about him, tell them uh, to write about AC current and to smear Westinghouse and some of his competitors sometimes. Um, and so by having this close relationship with journalists, also they wrote about the different products. He was always in the news, the different inventions that were being developed at Menlo Park. And this is related to another point where Edison cultivated this image of the wizard of Menlo Park. Right? He was a wizard. He created all these inventions. We'll see that he didn't himself create all these inventions. But this image of the wizard of Menlo Park also was very important here and was developed with all these journalists with which he had a very nice relationship. Edison was, for his time, a master of understanding brands and branding and how that works, right? Starting from the image of the Wizard of Menlo Park, starting from his extensive coverage in the media, which made his name a staple, equivalent to innovation, invention, creativity, and then taking this brand power of the Wizard of Menlo Park, of the Edison name, and associating it with electricity, with what became later the General Electric Company. And so this is a very interesting dimension. So to summarize, uh, the public had a very positive view of Edison, of Edison's company, of Edison's company's inventions. And I think this was one of the greatest achievements of Edison. And as we saw with the light bulb, and this relates to our discussion when we were talking about James Watt and the invention of the steam engine. Like, it's not creating the product that matters the most. Well, it matters a lot, but it's about, can you make this product useful for the masses? And so here, one of the most important tools that Edison had in making all these different products mass distributed, mass sold, mass consumed was his mastery of images, markets, PR, and branding. In this section, I want to go over some differences. I want to compare Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Now, Tesla is a peculiar, quirky individual. Personally, I admire his personality, his work a lot, and I'll probably have an episode on Tesla separately later. But I think that the contrast between Edison and Tesla is so beautiful and rich that it can help illuminate some of the ideas we are trying to clarify here. So, first, on studies and intellectual interests, interestingly, like Edison, Tesla didn't get a formal degree. Now, he spent more time at universities twice. His father wanted him to study law, but he studied physics, I think, first, and then he studied mathematics. But in terms of intellectual interests, this is where the difference starts, because Edison, as we said, was very much interested in whatever is practical. What does this idea do? What can I do with this idea? While Tesla had a deep interest in math, of course, physics and mechanical engineering, but he also had an interest in literature, poetry, and philosophy. And here we can start seeing some difference, and this helps understand some other effects or some other choices that each of them made in life. So Edison was more practical, was more focused on trial and error, was more focused on hard work, while Tesla was more visionary and was stronger theoretically. So to speak, he had deeper theoretical understanding. And this is why some of his ideas on the AC current, on the wireless transmission of electrical signals for example, had the form that they had. Now, again, if we think about Edison, he was involved with 1,000 plus projects. What does this mean? Usually, it means that you're involved on 1,000 plus projects in relatively disparate and different fields, right? There is a grid, there is a light bulb, there is a phonograph, there is a motion picture recorder, whatever. They're very different. While Tesla's repertoire was kind of more limited, but much deeper, right? Because he was more theoretically involved. And if you read some of the memoirs of Tesla, you'll be surprised the amount of depth and even mystical, mystical or mystical-like discussions that he includes. So Edison had a work style that was focused on hard work, on working with others, collaborating with others, while Tesla favored solitude, obviously. So extroverted Edison, introverted Tesla, relentless perseverance Edison, visionary and intuitive Tesla. And here we can appreciate the different approaches, the different ways on which people can be creative. Because, as we said, one of Edison's greatest achievements was building all these systems, creating all these systems, bringing all these people together, managing relationships with journalists, something that wasn't even on Tesla's radar, right? He wasn't remotely interested or able to do that on account of his personality. So, yeah, project range is different. The approach is different. The view towards collaboration is different. The view towards knowledge is different. And here we can start asking questions. Can we say this is better? This is worse? And we will reflect on this another time as we conclude the discussion here. Now, I want to talk about some aspects of Edison's work that many people will perceive as dark. And the word dark is associated with the light bulb here. So uh, Edison had a very aggressive patenting and litigation strategy. He used slash abused the U.S. legal system with patents. He had, as we said, more than 1,000 patents to his name. He didn't create these 1,000 items, right? There were teams working, but he would take credit for the invention because he is the wizard of Menlo Park. Now, mind you, this is a common practice. This was a common practice at the time. So Edison wasn't the only one doing that. Whenever I do something like this, somebody would tell me, yes, but he was a product of his time. This is exactly what I'm saying. He was a product of his time in this sense. Smear campaigns. So Edison ran all these smear campaigns against his competitors. He controlled journalists. He told journalists what to write, and even without enough knowledge, even himself without enough knowledge, right? He smeared AC electricity as less safe, and we are not exactly sure of that because, as I said, it depends on the technical variables play. But he didn't know that it was less safe, and as a result, the public paid a hefty price because, if, as we know, the transportation, the movement of AC, of alternating current, is much easier and less costly. And this is why most of the globe now uses AC, right? So Edison's campaigns and relentless focus on DC, his semi-monopolistic approaches, something we will call now monopolistic, it led to certain costs that the public had to pay. Edison was involved in building monopolies, bribing not just journalists, but politicians sometimes. I read, I don't know how documented that is, but particularly related to creating one of the first grids, which was an amazing achievement, right? Building an electric grid is an amazing achievement in New York City. Lobbying, corporate espionage. He would pay people to go work for Westinghouse and to reveal some of the projects that Westinghouse was working on. So he was a product of his time. To be able, and this is something we will discuss in the next section, to be able to achieve all this, do you need to be dark? Can you do it without being dark? I'm not sure of the answer. Get It Done summarizes Edison's approach to work, to creativeness. But first, I want to start with a note on trial and error. So, as we said, Edison believed in hard work, resilience, perspiration, as his quote goes. So, how good is trial and error as a method in invention and innovation? One interesting fact here, and there is a famous statement about Edison saying that, something to the extent of, I tried so many times, I didn't fail, but I just discovered 10,000 ways that didn't work. Now, the interesting fact here is that in order to come up with the right material for the light bulb to make it last longer and work better, Edison reportedly tested in his lab more than 6,000 materials, right, before he could come to the final one. 6,000. Like, imagine yourself sitting in a lab doing 6,000 tests. That's a lot of hard work, a lot of effort, and a lot of dedication. So the question here is, how good slash reliable is trial and error? Trial and error is great because it is a hard approach to solving a problem. It is you saying, I will not give up. I have all this in front of me and I will keep trying till it works. But the problem with trial and error is that it is costly. And this applies in life as well, right? Many people say, I only learn from my own mistakes. That's great. You should learn from your own mistakes, but that's very costly. If you need to make all the mistakes to learn, it is kind of problematic. So it takes time and it takes a lot of resources. And this is what Edison had. He had a lot of resources. As we saw, he was a man of systems who commanded these huge teams, these huge companies, divisions that were doing a lot in so many different fields. So it is a hard approach. It needs a lot of resources. But interestingly, the more you know, the easier trial and error becomes. It's sort of like guessing the answers on an MCQ question in an exam, right? If you know nothing and you just guess, you probably will have a problem, right? But if you know even just a little bit, you can start saying, this is probably wrong, this is probably wrong. And so your chances of success increase drastically. And so the more you know, the more you know, the more likely it is that you can rule out a number of these tries and you can make the trial and error process better and more efficient. Second point to talk about here in the creativeness of Edison is his work on systematic innovation, what we can call systematic innovation. And as I told you, we don't we shouldn't think of Edison as this lone inventor who created the light bulb. This wasn't who he was. He was a man of systems. He was a man of collaboration, working with others, getting things delivered to the markets, getting things to be adopted on mass scale. So one of his most important achievements is actually the creation of the first corporate research facility, or the first corporate research lab. And interestingly here, the Menlo Park, his work here revolutionized how corporate R&D gets done. By creating this lab, he is transitioning industry from the image of the lone inventor, the crazy scientist who sits somewhere and comes up with something, to this idea of a team working together, collaborating, doing tests in parallel. And so it had a number of guidelines. First, in terms of organizational structure. So the lab was organized in such a way as a dedicated research facility, but with different scientists from different fields, different levels of expertise, with clear division of roles and responsibilities and processes to follow. And this takes us to the second point. The innovation process worked in a systematic way within the lab. So we had clear objectives that need to be reached. They were based frequently on market needs, and this is something about Edison. He wants something to be practical. There was a drive towards rapid prototyping and iteration. So the process, what usually drives successful innovation, was institutionalized, right? It became built into the DNA of this research lab. And there was parallel experimentation being done. So trial and error is now going at full speed, as we said, utilizing resources. There were regular team reviews and knowledge sharing. Third, resource management. If we come together, there are much more resources to use, right? And this is again the point I mentioned when I talked about trial and error. Resources are very important. So these labs were well equipped, They had shops, they had extensive material libraries, options to work on, to test from, efficient supply chain for any components needed, and allocation of research funds to different projects. And finally, there was systematic knowledge management. So detailed notebooks to take notes, to write down the results, patent tracking systems, a technical library as a reference. All of this was very important at the time. And these practices sort of became a template for many organizations and companies on systematic innovation, on corporate R&D. And there were many companies that used that template and developed it and added. Final point here is, again, around the same theme. Edison's creativeness was in being able to utilize the big systems around him to drive innovation further. Examples on this include his utilization of the finance industry and his close relationship with JP Morgan, who was a financier. But, and this is something important, I always say when talking to students who are trying to be entrepreneurs, if you get somebody to back you, and you are increasing the chances of getting somebody else to back you. So imagine if this somebody is someone like JP Morgan, okay? He utilized the patent, the legal system in the United States to the maximum, registering all these patents in his name, cornering his opponents. Some patents were overlapping, so it made it very hard opponents to fight him on this. He employed lobbying in a great way, lobbying politicians, but also working with journalists, as we mentioned, in many different ways to get his narrative across, to get his own version of the events, of the inventions, of the products across to the public. And here we need to say that it is not easy to be a man of systems, right? It is not easy. Even though some people would look at this and see the negative dimensions of it, this is something that takes a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication, a lot of energy, and a lot of power. So to conclude this discussion on Edison, let's reflect on what lessons we can learn. So the discussion included ideas on imagery, on communicating, on knowledge, on hard work, building systems, utilizing existing systems, collaboration and resourcefulness, the power of curiosity, self-reliance, and perseverance. Very importantly, the discussion centers around the idea of being able to use the systems around you, being able to apply and manage the systems around you to achieve your objectives, to drive innovation, to drive change. And this is what Edison was doing. We had a discussion on ethics, on how ethical were some of these practices. We called them dark, but we have to keep in mind the bigger picture of that. Most of the people we talk about are men of their time. Now, men of their time is just a statement that might be good, might be bad, might be neutral, because many visionaries are not supposed to be men of their time, right? They're supposed to be better men. They're supposed to see a better future, and they're supposed to rise above the difficulties, the practices, the negative aspects of their own time, if possible. But there are always trade-offs for success. There are certain requirements that are needed to make things popular. There are deals that you need to make sometimes in order to succeed. And so, who owns the future? We can talk a little about legacy, but first, let me say something. The creativeness, being able to innovate, being able to change the world, being able to shape the world, sometimes inherently has this dark component, right? Because if you are trying to change the world, towards what? Towards your own vision. Okay. The more intensely you pursue your own vision, then probably the more in love you are with a certain view of the world that is closely related to you personally. So when we talk about legacy, and this is a statement by Tesla, who said, "The present is theirs. The future for which I really worked is mine. And here it would be interesting to see that in even though Edison made a lot of money from the electric power, from the grid, from DC current, Tesla's vision was completely different. He believed that all people should get electricity for free. And this is what I meant when I said that sometimes these great men, these people who, or great women, these people who do great achievement, who do great work, they need to rise above the ideas prevalent in their own time. So these are some final thoughts to keep in mind related to the dark phase of creativeness sometimes and related to the future. Who owns the future? Can we say that the future belongs to person A or person B? Or are they all different versions of the same rich processes of creativity and innovation?